Good evening once again, everyone. A warm welcome to tonight's session, Unlocking Nature, brought to you by Leadership for Conservation in Africa. My name is Diane Mumarungu. I'm based in Rwanda, and we are so glad to have everyone with us this evening. Today's session is a special one. We are going to dive into incredible underwater world of one of the oceans, but yet sometimes overlooked, but yet it's an ecological vital creatures, the sea cucumber. And I know most of us probably it's the first time that we are healing sea cucumber, but don't worry, you're going to learn more about it tonight. So leading us through this topic, we have two amazing speakers, Tara Bratton and Timothy Klückow. And I want to mention that Tara Bratton is based in Australia, and unfortunately, she's not yet here with us in this session. I will have to apologize. It's already 3 a.m. in Australia, so time can be really hard for her to join us. But Timothy has offered us an incredible work to go through with us the part that she was going to cover. And Timothy is a lifelong conservation field specialist who has spent most of his life living in rural communities where people's livelihood are directly tied to wildlife ecosystem. His core focus is transitioning the aquaculture and conservation development space from small-scale livelihood approaches to commercial, viable, community-based aquaculture enterprises. They aim at reducing coastal community reliance on natural resources for income generation. With that, I would like to warmly welcome our first speaker, Timothy Klückow. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Diane. And wow, it's quite a lineup of interesting talks that you guys have got on. And definitely will be joining some of those. And wonderful to read some of the comments, some of the people around the world that are here to listen to this talk. Thank you for joining. So yeah, my name is Timothy Klückow. I am from Zimbabwe. And there was once upon a time when I also knew very little about sea cucumbers. We don't have an ocean in Zimbabwe. And they are quite unassuming animals. Not many people go out of their way to look for them or to research them. However, thankfully, this is changing. And this is changing recently because we are understanding just how vital these animals are to coastal ecosystems. So it's going to be my pleasure tonight to speak about why sea cucumbers are such splendid animals. And it's a real pity that Taylor isn't here because she is very passionate about sea cucumbers as well. She's doing her PhD on how CITES protections are affecting small-scale fishes around the world and what effect they're having on reducing the unsustainable exploitation of sea cucumbers. So she may pop on later. And forgive me if I absolutely butcher her presentation, but what I'm going to do is go through and hopefully I'll be able to see where she was going at. First, Taylor's presentation, which gives background information and a global backdrop to sea cucumbers in general, their trade, how they're caught, and some of their effects in the marine ecosystems in which they're found. And then I will go on to showcase the work that our company, a silly company, is doing here in Zanzibar in East Africa, whereby we are using sea cucumbers as a means to drive coastal conservation and to empower communities to be able to set aside areas of their coastal commons, to be able to restoratively mariculture sea cucumbers for the benefits of the ecosystems where they should be, as well as for their own personal incomes, and as a means for conservation in general. So I look forward to going through that with you a bit later. But I think what we can do is we can dive into Taylor's presentation here. You can get an understanding of how fascinating these animals are and how important they are, and also how critically endangered they are and what that means for coastal ecologies, coastal conservation, and coastal livelihoods as well. So the surprising splendor of sea cucumbers. They are an incredibly diverse range of animals. Sea cucumbers are found throughout the world's oceans. There's literally not a single habitat in the ocean where you do not find sea cucumbers, from the abyssal plains at its incredible depths to the coastal shallows where we as aquatic monkeys sometimes go. You'll find them. You will even find them in pelagic, in midwater, because there's some that swim as well. You get some that filter feed, you get some that feed on the sediment, and you get everything in between. They are incredible animals for a variety of reasons, which we'll go into, and they're frankly quite bizarre as well in terms of how they look and some of their biological characteristics as well. So this is a species called ananas because it looks a bit like a pineapple. It's very threatened. There we go. There's a few sea cucumbers and some of the habitats that they are found in. You'll see that there's a picture of a medicine bottle there. And this is because that over millennia, in fact, sea cucumbers have been exploited, particularly by Chinese fishers and traders, because they form a very important part of Chinese culinary history. These sea cucumbers entered into the Chinese diets in the Ming Dynasty, and this is 1,000 years BC is how long these animals have been exploited. And they were originally consumed for their restorative effects. They were a health food. I think many of you might know that Chinese medicine is very much based upon food. Food is medicine, and medicine is food. And Western science is recently catching up with this traditional knowledge, and we are finding that there are bioactive compounds within sea cucumbers, which have incredible restorative effects for skin, for internal health, for combating chronic diseases such as arthritis. And this is principally because of some of the component parts of sea cucumbers, which have got bioactive compounds, particularly collagen, and a number of other compounds which are very interesting for human health. Now, it's sea cucumbers live in environments on the bottom of the floor. Aha, there we go.
We have her.
Hi, everyone. Sorry that you had to start without me. I thought that it was an hour earlier. It's actually 3 in the morning right now, and it should have been 2 in the morning when I woke up. I'm very sorry from over here in Australia, but thank you for covering, Tim.
Great that you're here. I would have butchered it. So great. I'm looking forward to hearing your talk, Taylor.
I'll just hop on it. Though you might not guess it from sea cucumbers' generally uncharismatic appearances, they're quiet powerhouses. They support these billion-dollar industries. They help coral reefs overcome the impacts of climate change. They protect seagrasses, transform coastal economies, show promise as cancer treatments, all while being at the center of growing international crime syndicates. Despite these benefits to society and our oceans, sea cucumbers are disappearing at an alarming rate and often slipping through the cracks of both conservation and public awareness. So today, we will tell the story of the sea cucumber, which is a story of extraordinary ecological importance, cultural value, and the potential to transform livelihoods through aquaculture and sustainable traceable trade. So I'll start by unpacking the fundamentals. What really even are sea cucumbers? Why do they matter to human health, to tradition, to ecosystems, and to the coastal communities who depend on them? And most important, why are they being pushed to the brink? And most importantly, what can be done about it? So then Tim will go on to share this real-world solution about community-based aquaculture and how it can be both a sustainable business model and support livelihoods and ecosystem health. So sea cucumbers are this surprisingly diverse cast of characters belonging to the phylum Echinodermata, which they share with sea stars, urchins, and sand dollars. But class Holothuridia is as different to other echinoderms as we are to other vertebrates like fish or lizards. So there are 1,786 known species of sea cucumber, and they are found from pole to pole, from the cold waters of Antarctica to warm coral reefs, from the deep sea to shallow, warm seagrass meadows and mangrove forests. And with all this diversity comes variety. Some are deposit feeders, while others are suspension feeders. And they're also quite diverse in how they reproduce. So some are gregarious spawners who release eggs and sperm into the water column simultaneously to increase their reproductive success with other species in the area, like the Stellanota ananas, the pineapple sea cucumber, which is one of my favorites. And others are a little more protective, like the red-chested sea cucumber from South Africa, who protects and broods its eggs. So, okay, they're diverse, but why are they important to the environment? So sea cucumbers are sort of these invisible engineers of ecosystem health, and they mainly do this through nutrient recycling, among other things. But many are deposit feeders, and they're breaking down this organic matter and creating nutrients out of it, which is very important for oligotrophic ecosystems or nutrient-poor ecosystems like coral reefs. And not only do they help coral reefs through this method, they're also able to fight ocean acidification to some extent by alkalizing the seawater and buffering it through their digestion, which is quite amazing. And they're also considered as a sort of gardener, where since they're taking this microalgae off the sea floor, turning that back into nutrients and promoting more primary productivity that settles on the bottom again, they're then creating this cycle of productivity in the ecosystem, like gardening. And also like gardening, they perform something called bioturbation in the burying species. So this is essentially where they're aerating and mixing the sediment, similar to how earthworms aerate and mix sediment in our gardens. And this allows them to be these stewards of the seagrass, where they're bioturbating, they're aerating, mixing, and increasing nutrient uptake. And they're also, in some ways, removing sediment from the blades of seagrass. So they're promoting photosynthesis, and all of these actions are helping seagrasses grow a lot faster. So they're also very important for waste management in ecosystems. They eat all of this dead organic matter off the sea floor, and that makes them quite promising for a lot of things like trophic aquaculture, where if you have an intensive fish farm, you're putting a lot of nutrients into a very tight system. And the only place that those nutrients have to go as excrement is down. So sea cucumbers can help mitigate the negative impacts of intensive aquaculture. And I'm really glad this GIF isn't playing here, thank goodness. But sea cucumbers are great hosts. And they are hosts to a variety of commensal organisms and parasitic organisms. Oh, don't play it, it's so gross. So that is the pearlfish, which lives inside of the sea cucumber, inside of its body cavity, and eats it from the inside out. That is an excellent example of a parasitic organism. But we also have some really nice commensal organisms, like this emperor shrimp on the right, who hitches a ride on the backs of sea cucumbers, like a little hitchhiker. And they are also prey to a variety of species. So they're transferring this energy from the lowest trophic levels all the way through the food web. And they're often found in quite high densities in some species naturally. So there's a lot of biomass to move through the ecosystem and create biodiversity. So they're great for the environment, but why do they matter to people? So sea cucumbers have been considered a delicacy in Southeast and East Asia for centuries. And they make up part of the high-value dried seafood market, along with shark fins, fish maw, and abalone. But in their dried form, they're known as bêche de mer or trepang. And they're served as a luxury delicacy at business dinners, banquets, weddings, Lunar New Year celebrations as a symbol of wealth, status, and longevity. And it turns out that they're actually pretty good for you. So they've been used in traditional Chinese medicine for centuries, and they're known as the ginseng of the sea for their ability to boost immunity, reduce inflammation, act as an antioxidant, among other things. And some of these claims are now supported by Western medicine. So they're used in nutraceuticals for the variety of nutrition that they contain. They're also used in pharmaceuticals for bioactive molecules found within them. Cosmetics industries are noticing how much collagen is found in their body wall. In some species, that can be up to 80%. And they're increasingly used as a cancer treatment for a molecule called frondicide A that's found in a cold water sea cucumber called Cucumaria frondosa. And all of this pressure drives a pretty big market. So sea cucumber trade is valued at $1.38 billion, and 90% of that supply is going to China. And the growth of the Chinese middle class desiring more luxury food, as well as the growing demand for biotech in the West, is pushing this market towards $2 billion in the next 10 years. So the value isn't only at the end of the value chain, but sea cucumber fisheries provide value to small-scale fishers around the world. And this is a really interesting fishery because it has few barriers to entry and very little economic input in the first place. And it's also intertidal. So women and children can participate economically in this fishery, which strengthens local livelihoods and food security through the money gained from export. And it also diversifies catch in the fishery. If they're fishing for sea cucumbers, they might not be fishing for something else. So here's the real question: why are we so worried about sea cucumbers? Well, it's mostly because they are highly valued, but very poorly protected. And sea cucumbers are overfished, poached, trafficked with often little oversight or awareness. And it, in some ways, comes down to the fact that they're not particularly charismatic. They're sort of these blobby, wormy, no-eyed animals. And they're kind of hard to market. And I think that's really well demonstrated by this World Wildlife Foundation ad, where I think we probably would care a lot more about sea cucumbers if they looked like pandas. And the problem is that sea cucumbers are sort of these perfect storms of vulnerability, and they're often part of these boom and bust fisheries where there's this thing called the roving bandits of the sea cucumber trade, which I won't go into, but it kind of enables people to fish from country to country. They go and exploit a fishery. It grows in value and then completely collapses. So this is also due to sea cucumbers' life history traits. They're very long-lived. Some species can live up to 12 years, and others live between 5 to 10. So it's also coupled with the fact that they're sedentary. They live on the seafloor, they're not going very fast, and they're really easy for us to pick up. They're also density-dependent spawners. They spawn all together at a certain high density. So if those densities can't be met due to overfishing, it's unlikely that their populations will be able to recover from overfishing. And the demand for sea cucumbers is increasing faster than we can manage our fisheries due to this growing demand from Eastern and Western markets, compacted with our inability to manage these fisheries well, our lack of species-specific data, and we do have a problem monitoring global trade. So all of this really comes down to the small-scale fisheries. And these are the people who are impacted the most by sea cucumber trade. And there are 3 million people worldwide involved in sea cucumber fisheries from the industrial fisheries in the global north to the mostly artisanal fisheries in the tropics, which are part of the informal economy most of the time. They're often community-based organizations, and they're often dominated by women in gleaning in the intertidal zone. So people fish for sea cucumbers in a lot of ways. And of course, one of those is gleaning. Another is free diving, whether that is opportunistic catch of sea cucumbers along with other invertebrates or fin fish, or intentional. And when the fishery moves to a scuba-based fishery, it often leads to overexploitation if not properly managed. So many countries have already banned scuba, fishing for sea cucumbers on scuba, specifically in the Western Indian Ocean as well. So scuba allows you to stay down for longer, of course, catch more sea cucumbers, but it also poses a risk to human health. Sometimes people are diving on unsafe gear, sometimes they're untrained, or they're completing these repetitive deep dives that are unsafe to their health. And if the fishery is banned on scuba, they're often hesitant to seek medical attention when they really need it. And despite this being a massive billion-dollar industry, where one sea cucumber in China could sell for $1,000, a fisher might only see $1 of profit. So the value chain is long and steeply unequal, and it increases towards the top. But despite this, fishers are still receiving the smallest share. So my research focuses specifically on the Western Indian Ocean and how trade of sea cucumbers influences the livelihoods of small-scale fishers. So the Western Indian Ocean is sort of a chronically understudied region, and for this particular issue as well, but it also produces 1/3 of the world's bêche de mer, this dried sea cucumber product. And many of these fisheries are considered either overexploited or fully exploited. And this is after centuries of trade from East Africa to Asia through traditional trade routes. So the trade of sea cucumbers is kind of passed through these traditional knowledge systems, but now we're seeing more and more species that are incorrectly labeled. They're traded under the wrong names or generic names, like just sea cucumber or invertebrate, or they're smuggled with shark fin, fish maw, abalone, seahorses, or other high-value products. So to combat this illegal trade, 5 species of sea cucumber were listed under CITES Appendix 2 between 2019 and 2022. 4 of those species are found in the Western Indian Ocean. So CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, has appendices, and the second appendix is essentially saying that this trade shouldn't threaten species survival in the wild. And to comply with these listings, countries have to do 2 things. The first is produce a non-detriment finding, saying that this trade doesn't threaten their survival. They also have to produce a legal acquisition finding, saying that these species were legally acquired in our country's laws. So that's easy if your country doesn't have any laws, but against the take of certain species. But that will make it a lot harder to prove that it's not detrimental to trade them if they're listed in CITES. So creating non-detriment findings requires a lot of input, trade data, stock assessments, things that a lot of countries with lower institutional capacity just can't put together because of limited funding, different conservation priorities, even though CITES gives us this fantastic opportunity to improve management and pushes countries in the right direction, often it requires a lot more capacity than a lot of places have. So this all really is part of these challenges that we face in sea cucumber conservation. And that spans from the data deficiencies, our lack of biological species-specific data, and socioeconomic data that's either inexistent or incomplete. Our gaps in enforcement, we struggle to train species-specific ID. And when we trade sea cucumbers, they're traded in a lot of different forms. They're dried, fresh, salted, frozen. They look different and they weigh different. Illegal trade is always a pervasive issue. And when we try to regulate fisheries, we're often putting the pressure mostly on the primary harvesters. We're creating bans, but that doesn't affect the middlemen as much as it affects the small-scale fishers. So there are a lot of solutions at a lot of levels, but organizations like Traffic are doing a really good job at the international level through increasing this collaboration between countries, especially in the Western Indian Ocean. They're helping to improve enforcement through species identification and customs training, like this guide on the right here. And they're helping with the solution of creating legal pathways to trade, as well as traceability programs, which Tim will likely go into in just a second. And at the national level, governance should be shared between communities and the government. But when the government creates laws, they should ensure that they are precautionary, not reactionary to overfishing, and they should be designed with fishers in mind. And when governments work with fishing communities, there are a lot of methods that can be really beneficial. And so MPAs are always a fantastic solution because they are protecting these breeding populations. They can also protect nursery grounds. And while they're doing this, they can provide spillover to sea cucumber fishing communities who can collect them outside the boundaries. But if sea cucumber fishing, or if sea cucumber marine protected areas are made, they actually should be designed for sea cucumbers, not for finfish. And they should think about creating these connected networks to make sure that the larvae dispersed from one MPA can move to the next like a stepping stone. So you protect the source and the sink. They should also be large enough to create these protections from all sorts of life history traits, from multi-species, from the seagrass to the reef, potentially, if that's what works in that area. And they can't be large enough to not be able to be enforced, but they should be large enough to encompass all these zones. And this kind of leads into the solution of aquaculture, which Tim will tell you a lot about, but it has the potential to not only create jobs, but also integrate some of these other solutions, like creating de facto marine protected areas or shared governance tenure, and creating this sort of no-take zones that are economically quite valuable. And Tim will go on to tell you all about that just now. So thanks for, I'm so sorry I was late, and thanks for listening to my part of the presentation.
Thank you, Tara. We appreciate your commitment to sacrifice your time. Yeah, without further ado, Timothy, you can go ahead and continue with his part. Thank you.
Great. Taylor, glad that you came back online. It was a wonderful presentation and really gave a really great backdrop on sea cucumbers, why they're important, and you know, the global backdrop of trade dynamics and conservation as well, and how sea cucumbers tie into marine conservation, which is a really critical part of what I want to talk to you about tonight. So I'm coming here tonight to present Community Mariculture Protection Areas, CPMA. Now, this is a picture that was taken in Madagascar in a locally managed marine area, which Blue Ventures has been working on for many years, called Velandriake. And I had the pleasure of working there for 3 years, leading their aquaculture program and developing sea cucumber aquaculture in partnership with coastal communities. This was a farm which is around 5 hectares, and we implemented a no-take zone within the area that was being utilized for sea cucumber ranching. And I'm going to share a little bit later about some of the dramatic impacts and benefits that was accrued due to this new form of marine protection area. So Taylor's given a really great backdrop of a number of different sea cucumber species, and I want to go into a little bit more depth on a particular species that we work with at a silly company. This is the sandfish, or Holotheria scabra. It used to be super abundant throughout the West Indian Ocean, and I actually saw an interesting comment from one of the attendees here tonight mentioning how overfished this species has been within the coastal common pool areas within Tanzania, where there's been a moratorium for nearly a decade now, but has yet to achieve real results because it's a very difficult species to manage the fisheries of. Globally, we have tried many different techniques, but to be honest, we've been failing. The sea cucumber stocks around the world are in dramatic decline. However, the market opportunity presented by sea cucumbers has got real potential to be harnessed for marine conservation and for community economic development and for direct ecological conservation. So this is a sea cucumber, a sandfish sea cucumber, and we believe it could be the key to protecting its own seagrass habitats. So this is one of the world's most valuable tropical sea cucumbers, a sacred treasure of Chinese cuisine since the Ming Dynasty, which is, millennia ago. This is how long this species has been harvested, and in many places over-harvested. We have wild populations which are now faced with extreme threat. As Taylor mentioned, we're no longer just fishing in the shallows for these animals. We are fishing with scuba, which is meaning that the last remaining broodstock, the breeders, the mature sea cucumbers that are contributing to recruitment, the juvenile recruitment, are now also being caught. And so just in the last 5 to 10 years, we are seeing dramatic declines of the few remaining sea cucumbers that we do have left. They are literally being fished to extinction. And alongside this, the market price is soaring and new markets are developing, which is accelerating their demise in the wild. So they used to be here. They used to be found in abundant numbers, but we are now have less than 1% of their natural densities and populations remaining throughout most of Zanzibar's waters. And this is true across the East Africa and across the West Indian Ocean, in fact, where this particular species of sea cucumber has been nearly entirely over-harvested, nearly to extinction. And we do find local extinction in many areas where they simply cannot be found anymore. I've dived this particular spot, and I'll be lucky to find a few sea cucumbers per hectare when they used to be found in the thousands per hectare. The loss of these animals has profound impacts on the coastal ecosystems around us. You imagine the densities that they used to be found in. Now, this was a study that was done in Fiji. It recently came out and was published in Nature, and it shows you a visual understanding of how abundant these animals used to be. And you look at that, it looks like it's overstocked. It looks like there's far too many sea cucumbers in this area, but in fact, that's not the case. This is natural abundancy. This again, it's simply fantastic. You can just imagine what the removal of such an abundant animal would have on the ecosystems in which they used to live, especially an animal which plays such an important role in so many different variety of ways. This is that paper I mentioned. Some really startling facts, in fact. For example, they removed sea cucumbers from a particular area, those areas in the pictures before, and what they found was that it's increased the risk of the coral colony mortality by 90%. It's just incredible. They found that there was nearly a 4 times greater increase in coral diseases in areas where the sea cucumbers had been denuded. And they are theorizing that this is due to the fact that sea cucumbers, as cleaners of the sediment on ocean floors, are feeding on coral disease-causing pathogens. And what we found, and what was mentioned in this article, is that we've basically lit an ecological fuse nearly a century ago by the overharvest of these animals, and we are feeling the effects now in increased coral diseases and mortality in general. To put it simply, if you remove sea cucumbers from coral reefs, the coral reef health declines. And vice versa, if you return these sea cucumbers, the coral reef dramatically improves in health. Quite incredible. Look at this density. Now, coral reefs obviously therefore need sea cucumbers, and sea cucumbers need healthy coral reefs to provide them the habitat that they need. Likewise, seagrass meadows desperately need sandfish, and sandfish themselves need healthy seagrass meadows. We can't think about fisheries management in the absence of the ecosystems in which these animals live in, which Taylor was mentioning. We need to have a broad understanding of the interactions between the animals that should be in the areas that we are trying to conserve. For example, you can close off a seagrass meadow, but if we do not return the populations of sea cucumbers which should be in there, they will not return to their natural function and abundancy and ecological diversity. These animals need seagrass meadows. And seagrass meadows need sea cucumbers. So this is a pretty complex web of interactions. But once again, put simply, we've had just dozens and dozens of studies that show that if you remove sea cucumbers from seagrass meadows, the health of the entire ecosystem declines dramatically. And once again, vice versa, if you return sea cucumbers at their natural density, the seagrass health and the overall ecosystem around it improves dramatically. These animals are crucially important. You think about what that type of density would have, especially the species that we work with, Holothera scabra. They have a diurnal burying characteristic, which means that every single day, every sea cucumber buries itself into the sediment and reemerges later. Now, this has really, really important effects on the health of the sediment, oxygenates it. The feeding releases nutrients that are therefore available to the primary producers around them, the seagrass and the microalgae. And we have found, we did a study in Madagascar in one of our farms where we reintroduced sea cucumbers to certain areas compared to a control. And we found dramatically increased productivity of the primary seagrass species within these areas. So the science is now very clear that these ecosystems desperately need to have their natural cohort of sea cucumbers returned. So how can we return sandfish to Zanzibar? This is where a silly company is based, and this is where we are working to restore these really vitally important animals. So first off, crucially, we need to protect their habitats. We can't think about protecting sea cucumber stocks without thinking about their habitats. And in managing sea cucumber fisheries, we need to think about how we can protect the overall environment in which these animals live, for their habitat and for the food sources of which sea cucumbers depend. As I'm sure many of you know, seagrass is vitally important for our world and particularly our oceans. 10 to 18% of ocean carbon burial occurs in seagrass meadows, and this is despite the fact that they are less than 1% of the total coverage of the ocean. Seagrass meadows support 20% of the world's largest fisheries, incredibly diverse and productive ecosystems, and we're losing them at 7% annually. This is just dramatic. And restoring seagrass meadows to their capacities in regards both their ecosystem interactions as well as their carbon burial will enable us to realize 26 of the SDG targets and indicators. They are vitally important. As well, seagrasses are incredibly important for reefs. And this is because of those really important functions of cleaning the waters, of restoring the habitat, which is used by a variety of different reef-dwelling species. Many species that you typically associate with the reef spend some of their time or breed within seagrass meadows. So this is that global web of ecosystems which are really highly interconnected, and we can't think about one without thinking about the other as well. And also vitally, we people need seagrass. Those of us in East Africa on the coast will know how vitally important these areas are for food, for livelihoods, these are near-shore coastal areas which are the most accessible, particularly to women and foot fishers who glean for food and livelihoods within the seagrass meadows. However, seagrass meadows are one of the most threatened ecosystems on Earth. We see here a variety of impacts. Seaweed farming, which happens predominantly in coastal seagrass meadows, has damaging effects upon seagrass due to foot trampling. Just like the lawn in your garden, the worst thing that you can do for seagrass meadows is walk in amongst it. These are soft bottom environments that a human foot can damage, which causes divots in the seagrass and allows water to flush in and actually ends up tearing away at the seagrass roots. And we are losing seagrass, which is one of the reasons why in East Africa we are starting to lose some of our seagrass meadows. Also, these areas, because they don't have hard substrates, because they don't have large coral bommies in many areas, they're very easy to pull big beach seine nets over, which is one of the most destructive forms of fishing we know, and not surprisingly results in a reduction by 400% of the diversity of fauna that lives within these areas. And because they are so easily accessible, they are very easy to overharvest. We now have over 80% of our sea cucumber fisheries overfished, and around 50 that are completely decimated. So how can we protect seagrass? We know we need to, but how do we do it? Well, no-take marine reserves are by far the most effective protected areas in the ocean. And this isn't surprising either. If you stop fishing in an area, it's got a high likelihood, if it is well protected, of returning to its natural abundance and diversity. We have the fortunate characteristic in the oceans that many juveniles and recruitment happens over large areas, and these areas can be repopulated if we are providing them adequate protection. Excuse me. Unlike, for example, wildlife management and terrestrial ecosystems, whereby you would have to physically transplant animals from other areas if you wanted to restock them with their natural diversity. In marine environments, all we need to do is protect them. Now, this is put simply, if you have unregulated fishing within marine coastal areas, we have dramatic declines in diversity and abundance. And if we restrict fishing in certain areas, we find that there is dramatic increase in diversity and abundance, which then has dramatic spillover effects to the areas surrounding them. We've proven this conclusively in many areas around the world. Yet it is very difficult to place no-take marine reserves around the world at the same time. And this is because these areas take time to accrue benefits, and fishers most often can't afford to fish less. So yes, okay, we need a protected area, but how do you go to a coastal community and say, hey, this is an area which you've been fishing from for generations, we're going to leave for a number of years, and it's going to eventually provide spillover. It's not a very good deal for a fishing community which lives day to day on what they can catch from these areas, and is often the reason why these no-take areas are either not appreciated or fail. Another factor is the fact that these areas really take significant and ongoing costs in order to do them effectively. Patrols on the water, eyes to make sure that these areas actually are protected. It costs time and money, and majority of these kind of no-take zones are put in place by NGOs that are working on limited budgets or on project funding cycles. And invariably, what happens when the funding dries up is that these areas no longer function. We also know that adjacent coastal communities have the clearest incentive and practical capacity, because they live there, to be able to sustainably manage their commons through no-take reserves. But as mentioned, they lack a financial driver, how to keep these areas remunerative for communities in the short term, and how to keep them sustainable in the long term by providing long-term benefits. Many MPAs, and particularly no-take marine reserves, are sold to communities by the benefits that they will accrue. But majority of these benefits often go to, not to the coastal community themselves, but to, for example, those who take tours to these areas, and those who have other mechanisms to make these areas financially remunerative. But it really takes a long time for this to actually benefit coastal communities. Spillover takes a long time, and you've got to do it really right for it to actually work, which is not often the case. And this is why we have got the sad fact that over 80%, nearly 90 of the world's MPAs are what we call paper parks, which are on paper only, but actually have no local support, and are very ineffectively managed. and aren't providing the really crucial ecological benefits that we need. Now, there are exceptions to this, and kudos to those who are doing it properly and have managed to find ways for them to impact communities at a local level, and to be long-term sustainable. But this is not the case for the majority of parks around the world. So we believe that the sandfish is the economic driver which is needed to be able to make no-take marine protected areas and certain habitats feasible and sustainable in the long term. These sea cucumbers have a massive market, as was mentioned by Taylor earlier. The market for their dried body wall as a food product is in the tens of billions per annum, and the rapidly growing market for their bioactive compounds is feeding into a market of hundreds of billions of dollars per annum. Now, this is a really interesting opportunity, but also really quite frightening for us working in the sea cucumber conservation realm, because it's really driving intensified fishing pressure for the last remaining sea cucumbers that we have in the ocean. Now, what is fascinating as well is that this growing market for particular bioactive compounds, because it's the health and beauty product, these markets are wanting to have a sea cucumber which is sustainably ranched and comes from wild areas. And the reason for that is because the majority of sea cucumbers, or sandfish at least, are sourced from large-scale intensive farming operations like we see in this picture below, which is really, it's not a healthy product. These sea cucumbers are often contaminated with heavy metals from the feed and the feces of the shrimp that used to be farmed in these farms. And also they have got no impact on the ecosystems where they need to be reintroduced. So it's really not having very much effect. And it's also churning out a product which is not healthy for consumers. So we truly believe that the world's demand to be able to supply this demand for healthy sea cucumbers, that they should be coming from places like Zanzibar, where tropical seagrass ecosystems desperately need these animals, and where coastal communities are also really needing sustainable livelihoods to be able to sustain them and to be able to reduce the pressure on extractive fisheries to be able to provide the needs, the economic needs that they have for their home and families. So by developing a feasible mariculture model for sea cucumbers in places like Zanzibar, we believe that we can restore livelihoods, ecosystems, and the sandfish populations, which are so desperately needed for their multifaceted ecological services that they provide. For example, and seagrass meadows in Zanzibar used to be abundant with these animals. Now, I say used to be. This is usually beyond the contemporary memory of most fishing communities. They've been overexploited for so long that many people don't know the abundance that they should be found. In very, very remote areas, particularly in Madagascar, I used to hear stories from some of the particularly older fishers that these animals used to be so abundant that they could walk for kilometers along the coastline, stepping from the back of one sea cucumber to the next. That is not the case anywhere in the world, except maybe for those few isolated MPAs like what we showed in that picture earlier. Now, the economic potential of restocking sea cucumbers at their natural densities is immense. For example, in this image, I've highlighted what 50 hectares looks like. And from this area, it's feasible that you'd be able to return a sustainable profit whilst keeping the majority of sea cucumbers in there, and to be able to return revenue generation capacities of $500,000 for 50 hectares. Now, this is just quite fantastic and incredible. And this would only use, in the case of this one farm here, less than 1% of Zanzibar's massive seagrass extent. So this really is an economic potential that can really drive incredible marine conservation and livelihoods benefits for the coastal communities who engage in it. So by empowering coastal communities to safeguard sandfish habitat and rewilding these areas with the millions of sandfish that should be there, and crucially also returning the majority of the revenue generated by the sustainable harvest of sea cucumbers within these areas from the areas which are being utilized, we can fund the long-term protection of crucial marine habitats. Now, this is the goal of the company that we have formed here, and this is our vision statement, which is to harness the abundant economic returns of regenerative sea cucumber aquaculture to create and fund the ongoing protection of a vast network of community-led, no-take marine reserves that spill over profit ecosystem services to coastal communities. Now, this is the dream that we are looking to achieve here in Zanzibar in East Africa. And in fact, all the way from East Africa to Fiji is the natural endemic range of the sea cucumber I'm talking about, the sandfish. And we believe that we can scale this model beyond East Africa to reach communities nearly across half the ocean's surface. So that sounds great. How are we planning to do this? So what we have termed as community mariculture protection areas, sorry for another acronym, but this is a CMPA, which is an area which is set aside by the community and which is used exclusively for the restocking of sea cucumbers to natural density and to be able to harness the sustainable harvest of sea cucumbers within these areas to be able to drive the protection of the entire area around it. And there's a term for this, it's called an umbrella species, by which one species can protect all the rest around it. And we believe that we can do this across seagrass meadows across Zanzibar and East Africa and the globe by making sea cucumbers economically remunerative for communities, and far more so than they could by pulling nets over these areas or by other extractive fisheries means. So what's a CMPA? Well, it's a nearshore coastal ecosystem where communities are equipped to profitably protect, restore, and sustainably manage valuable marine resources through the utilization of mariculture inputs and services. Now, mariculture is aquaculture, but in marine environments. And this is the utilization of techniques such as hatchery production of juveniles, and nursery production, to enable us to get to a sea cucumber which is of a large enough size, which is around the size of a finger, to be restocked into wild habitats without the risk of being predated upon. If you release them too early, they'll simply get consumed. For example, one pufferfish can easily eat 100 sea cucumber juveniles in a day. So we need to protect them a little bit before they go into these wild areas to be restocked into wild ocean areas. We formed a company to do this. We have 3 key directors who have worked in sea cucumber aquaculture across East Africa for the past decade, across multiple aspects of sea cucumber mariculture, hatchery, nursery production, and really crucially forging relationships with coastal communities in order to be able to set aside areas for the sustainable production of these animals. Most of these pictures come from Madagascar, some of the farms we developed there, and some from small-scale aquaculture farms in Zanzibar, which has been undertaken to a certain limited degree. However, sea cucumber aquaculture needs to take place at a scale beyond the livelihoods approach. It's simply unfeasible to put aside a very small enclosure and put some sea cucumbers in there, because likely those sea cucumbers will get stolen unless you have adequate protection of these areas. And in order to have adequate protection, you need to be able to hire a large number of people from the community. And on a small scale basis, this is just not economically feasible. And we also don't have the key capacity to be able to regenerate large scale areas of ocean habitat and to be able to do it at a commercial scale where this can continue in the long run. We have achieved this already. This was a commercial scale pilot when I was working in Blue Ventures. This is a 5-hectare area. And after 3 years developing this project, it was assessed by a group of researchers from the University of Edinburgh, funded by the Prince Albert of Monaco Foundation. And the key statement was that most fundamentally, the research on this farm confirmed that establishing community-based aquaculture within larger scale, locally marine managed areas can achieve both socio-economic benefits for the communities nearby and a robust basis for the biodiversity recovery of these crucial habitats, such as reefs, seagrass, and mangroves. This was undertaken in Madagascar with Blue Ventures and with support from Norge as well. And we developed a model which was improving the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of coastal fishers who before relied entirely on extractive fisheries. 3 years later, the majority of people in this community in Temple Louver were sea cucumber farmers and producing a sustainable product, whilst at the same time securing hectares of no-take marine protected area. Now, we researched what this no-take area achieved and what the reintroduction of the sea cucumbers at their natural density, and we found incredible benefits. Increase in seagrass cover, 50% higher seagrass canopy, 8 times the level of fish abundance, double the fish diversity, and just a massive increase in the amount of fish that were having safe and protected areas to live within. It was just incredibly evident. You'd walk in this farm after 2 years of it being in a no-take zone and stocked with sea cucumbers, and you'd just be swarmed with fish, swarmed with a variety of different invertebrates that you just wouldn't see in other areas that were being gleaned basically every night of spring tide, which is, half the month. And we also returned significant economic benefits to the communities that we worked with. This one particular village, we were returning over $40,000 directly into communities' livelihoods. This was directly paid for the sea cucumbers they farmed, and became, over the course of a few years, by far the largest economic driver of this community, a huge part of their coastal economy, and at the same time restoring seagrass meadows through no-take zones and through sea cucumbers. So Asili Company is now based in Zanzibar, where we boast one of a globally significant proportion of the world's seagrass meadows, beautiful areas across both islands. And these areas should teem with kilotons, thousands of tons of sea cucumbers. And these kilotons of sea cucumbers would be moving megatons of sediment each year. Each sea cucumber goes through and kgs of sediment, which they eat and then excrete, clean it on the other side. And this is a missing ecological benefit, which needs to be reintroduced to areas across Zanzibar. Most of these areas, when I dive them now, we find them in the kgs of hectares instead of tons, and in some areas simply nil. So this is really a massive lost opportunity for communities in Zanzibar and for the blue economy in general. So how do we go about rectifying this? So this is where CMPAs come in. So through the utilization of mariculture inputs and services, such as the provision of technical aquaculture management practices and market access, by developing mechanisms for area tenure governance and incentives for the coastal communities that live nearby these areas, through monitoring, control, and surveillance to make sure that the sea cucumbers are kept safe while they're growing to maturity, and crucially, with a hatchery that can supply the millions of juveniles needed to restock these areas at scale, at an ecologically significant scale. And with these inputs, we can profitably restore, protect, and sustainably manage the valuable marine resources within them, the sea cucumbers that we were talking about. That can provide well-paid professional mariculture work opportunities with equitable production shares for those who work within the farm, can provide incentives and community funds for the communities that live adjacent to these areas, and it can dramatically increase the abundance, as we saw in Madagascar, as well as diversity, as well as the ecological data from our farms, which is really recorded vigorously to ensure that we are keeping to correct stocking densities, as well as monitoring the ecological benefits. And it can also provide revenue to drive private sector inputs, which are needed to be able to scale this to a great scale. But it takes a community to restore sea cucumber populations, and they require significant support. This model cannot work without the buy-in from coastal communities that live within these areas, which is why many restocking initiatives across the world have failed. So communities need to be supported with the governance and tenure of these areas and all of those other inputs that are necessary. So in order to do this, we've built a coalition to restore sandfish populations and in order to benefit people, ecosystems, and coastal economies. Taylor mentioned Traffic, one of our critical partners who's working on developing a traceability mechanism for sea cucumbers so that we can show that sea cucumbers that come from wild, sustainable, and fair trade ranching areas within Zanzibar can reach discerning markets that actually appreciate that instead of lump them into wholesale markets. We're working closely with the government of Zanzibar, who within their blue policy objectives and aquaculture strategies have really recognized the need for extensive aquaculture models that directly support coastal communities and coastal ecosystems. And we're also working along the Wildlife Conservation Society, who's going to be, we're working within many of the MPAs that they are co-managing across Zanzibar. We're also working with WCS in order to be able to gather the ecological and sociological data to prove the benefits of this model and to be able to provide safeguarding to ensure that we are doing it in accordance with ecological standards and benefiting communities. And then a silly company is going to be responsible for providing the millions of juveniles which are necessary to make this model work. Sea cucumbers need to be at a critical density in order for them to restore the ecological services. But as Taylor mentioned as well, these animals are density dependent, have density dependent reproductive strategies. They broadcast their gametes into the water, and if they are not in a sufficient density, their gametes do not meet and fail to produce viable juveniles. So we need to be able to keep sea cucumbers at the density they should be. So when the right environmental conditions are there, when they breed, and they will breed, it means that within a year or two of these areas being stocked, we will be literally having billions and billions of juveniles being broadcast from each one of these protected areas, which will have dramatic effect on the recruitment of sea cucumbers in the surrounding areas that are not necessarily within these protected zones. So the return of sea cucumbers in their ecologically relevant densities will have profound and wide-ranging ecological benefits to the seagrass and reef habitats nearby. There's just a variety of papers out there showing the critical impacts that sea cucumbers provide to their natural habitats. We'll be able to increase coral vitality and resilience, reduce the risk of diseases affecting corals which are already threatened by warming waters. We'll be able to increase the nutrient cycling and the vitality of the seagrass meadows which they live within, and keep the entire ecology of these areas safe through the restoration of the sea cucumber stocks within, and through collaboration and partnership with the coastal communities whose areas are being utilized for this. So as a last comment, and crucially, these benefits will be to be able to provide the economic driver that is really needed in order to empower the community-centric protection of coastal ecosystems. So thanks, everyone. It's splendid. I loved the title of Taylor's talk. I really believe that sea cucumbers have a great degree of splendor, and that we can harness these animals to really provide the ecological, economic, and community benefits that are possible if we restock them at the scale that is necessary. So thanks for your time, and yeah, I look forward to fielding any questions that you might have.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for a beautiful presentation, Tara and Timothy. It was really eye-opening and insightful. And I want to acknowledge again both Tara and Timothy for taking your time and to give us this amazing, beautiful presentation. And I think most of us learned a lot. Yes, and let's go ahead with the Q&A session. And I've seen a couple of people have been dropping messages, and I've seen Ahmed Sandal wrote 2 questions in the chat box, and I would love to go first with him. And the rest, feel free to raise your hand. You can mute yourself and be able to speak your question. If Ahmed Sandal is still with us, you can mute your microphone and give us your 2 questions that you brought in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm joining a meeting from Durban, South Africa, right on the East Coast. What I want to know is that is there any evidence of poaching or legal collection of sea cucumbers in South Africa? Have you got any knowledge, Taylor or Tim?
Yes, actually, there is a fantastic report by Traffic, who has looked at all of the imports from Hong Kong, where most sea cucumbers are exported to, regardless of their end destination, and the countries that have exported them there, whether they report or not. So I'm not sure specifically about South Africa, but I do know that South Africa is definitely on that list. And I don't know how much certainty we have around the number of exports or the quantity and weight. But we do know that South Africa is exporting sea cucumbers. It's likely that there's a decent amount of illegal export. And yeah, the Traffic report, I could potentially share that with you as well. Or I could write the name in the chat too.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I want to know, I am a leading sea cucumber taxonomist, and that's what I've been doing for the last 50 years. I've just published a monograph in 2022 on the sea cucumbers of Southern Africa, south of the Tropic of Capricorn. Yeah, no, I was bit, I was somebody, in fact, I was invited to the meeting by a colleague of mine. I didn't know that this meeting is taking place until about a week ago. But that doesn't matter. I've got two more questions. First of all, I want to know is that the sandfish was threatened in Mozambique. I know around the 90s they wrote to me to find out where do these species recruit, where do they breed, where do they recruit from, as they were overexploited. And they discovered these because of the mangroves are disappearing. And those mangroves, of course, were being cut in order to boil, in order to soften the meat, right, of the sea cucumbers. Right, I told them to divide the coastal areas into manageable areas into about three to four, and open the areas for harvesting once every 3 or 4 years. What I want to know is that those of you au fait with the sandfish population in Mozambique, has any strategy been put into place to protect the sandfish?
Yeah, I'll jump onto this one. So,
Fine.
yes, I mean, really interesting question and really interesting to know your background. I'd love to see some of your work and to meet another sea cucumber specialist. To answer your question, Mozambique has, kilometers and kilometers squared of suitable habitat for sandfish. They used to be abundant there, but they, like most areas across East Africa and the globe, in fact, they've been overfished for so long that their populations are unlikely to recover without support, because they are so far and far spread. Active reproduction is not really possible, and we need to be able to reintroduce them at a large scale, usually using mariculture techniques, or by concentrating sea cucumbers into certain areas where they have the right density. So your question was what measures have been undertaken. So the we've tried that in many areas around the world. There's been seasonal closures for sea cucumbers, and then they reopen later. Unfortunately, this is basically a formalized fashion of the boom and bust fishery. So, for example, in PNG, the fisheries were closed in certain areas for 2 years, and when they were reopened, they were really significantly overharvested once again within weeks. So we really have a difficult situation with a species which is very easy to catch and very, very easy to overharvest. And so it's really difficult to do large area-based management practices, particularly because you need to protect these areas every night for 2 to 3 years. And this is really extremely expensive to do on a large scale and inefficient. And obviously doesn't usually happen like that. And so even if you were to protect them for up to a year, it wouldn't take very long for them to be all fished out again. So, the field, and as Taylor has been working with a number of researchers in Australia, Stephen Purcell, and amongst others who have been looking to develop strategies for conserving wild stocks of sea cucumbers, utilizing methods like ranching, seasonal closures, catch sizes, and things like this. But what we're really missing in Mozambique as well, in particular, is the enforcement capacity to be able to keep any of these regulations or any of these good ideas actually working in the long term, and to be able to fund these efforts in the long term. So it would be possible in a perfect world to restore sea cucumber fisheries like that, but unfortunately we don't live in a perfect world where we've got the resources to be able to protect very large areas and with them sea cucumber populations.
Thank you for your answer. I'll give somebody else a chance now.
Nice to meet you, Ahmed.
Nice to meet you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ahmed. Let's now have Taiwan Node. You can unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for the talk. This was really interesting. I was wondering, because I'm busy studying marine biology at the moment, and we recently did a class on ecotoxicology, including bioindicators, and I was wondering if sea cucumbers if they can be used as bioindicators, or if they're super sensitive to like changes in water temperatures or salinity, or if there's toxins in the water, if they die out quickly.
That's an interesting question. Taylor, go for it, and I'll jump in after.
I was just about to say you probably know so much more about this from your experience in in the field.
Sure, Tawani, very interesting question. So in terms of the species that I know best, the Holothurius scabra, or the sandfish, this is a species which lives in the intertidal zone, which experiences very extreme changes each day as the tide comes in and out, and which really affects the salinity and temperature of the water they live within. So I find myself lucky to be working with a very resilient species, which can handle quite extreme shocks in both temperature and salinity. So that might mean that they wouldn't be particularly good as an indicator for those, bioindicators. Others, I'm not sure. As they are sediment eaters, I'm sure that they would be quite a good indicator of any toxins or pollution within certain areas, because they would be directly ingesting that. And certainly you'd probably be able to find some toxins within sea cucumbers that are coming from polluted areas. Other species, I'm not sure, but it's an interesting question, and I hope you do research that.
Thank you. This is a very interesting talk. Thank you both very much.
Yes. There's another question that was asked by Nathan. If he's still in the room, you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you, Timothy and Taylor. That was a very interesting talk. It was quite an eye opener for me. I didn't know there was the sea cucumbers were so endangered, and yeah, it was very nice to hear that. So my question is, would it be beneficial for NGOs or government organizations to present courses to local communities on how to sustainably farm these sea cucumbers, so they can still sustain their livelihoods without reducing population numbers?
Absolutely. However, we face a difficult situation that aquaculture is generally not cheap. It requires quite a high degree of inputs, from technical training to covering the ongoing costs of those who are working to farm these animals. So one of the reasons why sea cucumber aquaculture hasn't really taken off the way it was hoped to is that these sea cucumbers, the species I work with, take around a year and a half to 2 years to reach maturity. In order for them to be able to effectively reproduce and create spillover, and to be able to reach a size where we can sustainably harvest them after they have already contributed to natural spillover and recruitment. So that takes around 2 years of active patrolling and management of the area, which requires for communities to be paid to do that in the period leading up to harvest. So it's quite expensive to do that, as well as needing the basically 24-hour protection of these sea cucumbers for the entirety of the time that sea cucumbers are stocked within them. It only takes one night for most of the sea cucumbers to be poached out of even large hectareage of areas, because they are so easy to catch. There's some case studies in Madagascar where sea cucumber farms had been operational for over a year and a half. The sea cucumbers were ready for harvest, and there was a holiday, and guards went off for one night and came back, and sea cucumbers had all been poached. And so in order for this really to be effective, you need to be really on the ball in terms of the protection of these areas, and to really integrate it into community livelihoods, so the whole community really protects the area as a whole. But yes, to answer your question, I do believe that there is great validity in allowing more people to know about how crucial these animals are. In some areas, they're chopped up and used for bait, and for aspects like that. So I think that if more people understood how important these animals were, that can never be a bad thing. But we, in the meantime, are looking at ways that we can develop a model whereby coastal conservation organizations or development organizations working around the world will be able to support coastal communities to effectively safeguard sea cucumber stocks in their areas through farming or ranching models, and to be able to support communities for that long period that is required in order for them to be able to reach an economic return from their work. So yes, I would say the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. More awareness building would be very useful.
Yes, thank you so much. And we have another question from Abuti Mohev. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name, I apologize. Okay, so he asked, how do we return them? Is it possible for us conservationists to breed them?
Well, it's not really the job of conservationists to breed them. It's really the job of technical mariculture experts. It's a very technical field and also quite expensive as well. Hatcheries are not cheap, and you need to have a very qualified and conscientious staff to be able to manage sea cucumber hatcheries. The good news is that it can be done. And over the last 10 years in particular, we've really benefited from a lot of research that is coming from Southeast Asian countries, particularly Vietnam and the Philippines, where various organizations have been doing really good work in reducing the overall costs and difficulties in producing these sea cucumbers. The one I'm speaking about is sandfish. And so we really do, it's no longer greenfield. We know how to produce these animals in large numbers, but we really need the investment capacity to be able to build the number of hatcheries needed to produce the juveniles to restock these areas. And let me add as well that sea cucumbers have quite a high degree of speciation around the areas that they inhabit. And so if we are working on hatchery production of juveniles, we need to make sure that the broodstock that we are using is producing juveniles suited to the area that we're stocking. I've heard proposals going around of a hatchery here producing juveniles to send to another country or to another region, which is hundreds of kilometers away. And that's not good. We need to really stick to the Convention on Protecting Biological Diversity. And what that means is that we ensure that the sea cucumbers that we are restocking into native habitats is the particular type of sea cucumber that should be there, which has evolved over millennia to a particular area and to particular environmental conditions in that area. And so hatcheries need to be quite site specific, even to the level that we would quite likely need different hatcheries across different areas in a single country that has a large geographic range of coastline, or particularly different environments, for example, on two sides of an island, which has very different environmental conditions on either side. So hatchery production is absolutely going to play a role, but we need to be careful and conscientious about how we do it.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions in the room? Let me ask Barry Dima to unmute his microphone. I see he drops 2 questions in the chat box. Please unmute your microphone.
Wow, Timothy and Tyler, these were really like eye-opening presentations. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm simply Reed Miller. I've been living in Tanzania for 40 years, right on the beach in Mwambani Bay, south of Tanga, and I've been snorkeling every day and seeing sea cucumbers disappear, being boiled on the beach. I think I'm telling you nothing new. And for about 10 years, you don't see them anymore. I'm also the founder of Chumba Island Coral Park in Zanzibar, which is the first private marine park in the world, and it's working because we really don't have user conflicts for at least 30 years. The spillover effect does work. We don't have conflicts with fishers, and it's running also sustainably because ecotourism does fund protection and enforcement of a no-take area. It really can work. We've been proving this for 30 years. And that leads a little bit to my question to Timothy about the governance model you are having for your work with communities. Honestly, I can't imagine this differently than being run by a private company, which Arceli is, as I assume. And of course, working closely with communities, but maintaining control basically by employing people to do the work you need to be done. And education programs for everybody else to respect the work and understand the benefits they can have. Now, of course, you need to have tenure rights over the area for your farms. I'm just wondering whether this is by agreement, like kind of management agreement with the government, like leasing the area, and that you have full control of it, that it cannot be used for other uses also. I mean, I see similarities with Chumba Island. We are closing an area for 30 years now, and we're using for ecotourism. And it's a total no-take zone. Nothing can be taken out, even not by researchers. But of course, it's as you said rightly, your very high value crop which you want to farm can very easily be stolen. I totally understand this. So the challenges are much more than the ones we would have. We don't have really major challenges for at least 25 years. So just basically seeing how your tenure works, or the legal structure you are suggesting, etc. But I find it very exciting, and I see like similarities to our no-take zone, which we have been managing for 30 years.
So, well, thank you for your comments, and thank you for your decades of work in Chumbe Islands. I've read a number of reports. My heart is really goes towards no-take marine protected areas. I've seen how effective they can be, both in terms of recovery of ecological environments, but also for spillover for communities around nearby, and also for communities to see what their reefs used to look like. I've really been to so many fishing villages where there is beyond contemporary memory how abundant marine ecosystems can be. And I really think it's a really vital part of marine conservation to be able to show coastal fishing communities what can happen when an area is conserved and protected for a long term. Your questions are very relevant, and you've hit the nail on the head in terms of tenure. So the model that we are developing, the tenure is not for a silly company. We are working to become a service provider and an input provider. And those services and inputs are the juveniles necessary and the technical aquaculture experience and practical measures necessary to be able to raise sea cucumbers within the areas that we are looking to do so. So a silly company won't have our own farms. We will be working to empower communities to be able to set aside areas which they will categorize as a sea cucumber ranching area. So the mechanism that we'll be using will be scaling support by providing juveniles and accessing donor funding to be able to support fishing communities directly to be able to set aside areas for sea cucumber ranching. We will then scale our inputs of services and juveniles to be able to grow those areas as they show that they've got the capacity to be able to rear them to maturity and to be able to protect them during that period as well. So that's going to require a very high degree of hand-in-hand work, and we'll have staff that will be working alongside fisheries organizations such as SFCs and such as the local ground level operations that have been taken place by various government MDAs. But we are very adamant that we are not looking to have tenure ourselves over coastal areas. These are coastal common pool areas, and what we are looking to do through a silly company is to be able to provide the skills, services, and inputs necessary to be able to empower coastal communities to be able to set aside areas of their coastal common and to be able to utilize that far more economically rewarding than through extractive fisheries and dragging nets over it. And there's some interesting case studies of how that's being done by communities already through hifadi areas. I think that there's some parallels in terms of how we can go about developing large-scale restorative sea cucumber aquaculture as well. I will say that this is a work in progress and that we are collaborating very closely with the government of Zanzibar in order to be able to develop a mariculture model which is fitting into the rules and legislation and policy of Zanzibar, and that can be adapted easily for mainland Tanzania, areas like Tanga and Pangani, which used to boast enormous populations of sea cucumbers, which are no longer there, as you mentioned, and across East Africa as well. So we're looking to develop a model whereby service providers can be able to empower communities to be able to restore their own coastal ecosystems through the economic benefits of sea cucumber aquaculture. And I'd love to meet you in person to be able to talk more about this. It would be fantastic one day.
Yes, thank you so much, Ridhima. Now, let's welcome two more questions, then we can close it and see we are out of time. There is a question we received from Nathan Gilman again. Paul Andrew Degro. If he can unmute or she can unmute their microphone and ask the question, and will be followed by Kate Lego Timber from TU team.
Oh yeah, about the nutrient pollution.
Yes.
The other thing I was just typing in. One of my experience, I'm back in the States now. I'm retired, but I spent a good part of my career working all across Africa as an ecologist. And one of the most upsetting things I saw was little white boys and girls from America and Europe coming to Africa loaded with donor money, more in love with the wildlife than the people, kicking people off their land and disenfranchising them from the resources they need to feed their family and earn a living. So I'm very glad to see what you guys are doing is integrating the local communities into the management of these areas. I think you're way ahead of a lot of conservation, so-called conservation programs in Africa that are really preservation programs. Even though you call them no-take areas, you're involving the community to manage those areas so eventually they can sustainably harvest and benefit from those areas. So I'm very glad to hear what you guys had to say. And as far as the nutrient pollution, is that a problem or not for the sea cucumbers?
Paul, very interesting comments. Sorry, Taylor, I'll be quick. Very interesting comments that you made in regards preservation and how that can impact coastal communities, and it's something that we very much keep in mind. I do think that there are some actors in the world that are working more for preservation and are not, valuing the really important daily needs of those who are accessing these resources. And conservation really needs to be for coastal communities and not conserving things from coastal communities. So your point is very valid. In terms of the effects of nutrient pollution, absolutely. I doubt there's any animal in the ocean that is not affected by runoff, particularly from agricultural areas that have unsustainable use of fertilizers and pesticides. So there's absolutely no way that this is not affecting sea cucumbers in areas with runoff. Everything is linked.
Yes, Taylor, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
Oh,
Yeah.
I actually was going to say something quite similar to what Tim said. So I'm happy with his answer. And thank you, Andre, for also recognizing how important it is to include coastal communities in conservation, because without working with the people who depend on the resources, conservation I find to be not as effective and often pointless if you're not working with those who depend directly on the resources. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew, for a good question and good feedback and comments, if I would say. We appreciate you. And let's have another question from Matiba TT, which is our last question before we close. But would creating initiatives from awareness not be a counterproductive measure to take as more people will be exposed to it and be equipped with the knowledge of what they are actually worth, resulting in the increase of illegal harvests? Who correct them without permit?
I was excited to answer this question because I think it's a really good point. But I almost think that it's better to give people the knowledge of the value of sea cucumbers for export, because the value chain is steeply unequal and fishers aren't getting a majority of the benefits from this billion-dollar industry. So by giving harvesters the knowledge of the value of the product that they produce and involving them in different steps of the value chain. So from aquaculture to processing the sea cucumbers, where a lot of value is lost, we lose a lot of value with middlemen. So if people actually know what they're worth, maybe we could give more opportunities to have them involved in different steps in this chain. And then that really comes down to proper monitoring, proper enforcement of exports, better training in customs. And it is good to know how valuable sea cucumbers are, so people can see the benefits a lot better. And there already is quite a lot of illegal harvesting happening and a lot of harvesting without permits. So I think that burden should fall a lot more on governments to properly monitor and manage exports. But it's a really good question.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. And as Tara and Timothy, as you can see in the chat box, there's so many text messages appreciating you for amazing presentation that you gave us tonight. And I also, on behalf of Leadership for Conservation Africa and Share in Africa, I want to really take this time and moment to appreciate for generously sharing the expertise and stories and practical insight about sea cucumber. I learned a lot and everyone really enjoyed it. As you can see, look where the time is. We're already 8:41 and it's in Rwanda and it's already too late, but I want to thank you for your time and amazing presentation and sacrificing your time, especially Taylor. We understand this is the crazy hour you could be waking up. And thank you so much. We appreciate it and we hope to see you again. And thank you to everyone who stuck with us until now. We appreciate you and I hope to see you in the next Unlocking Nature series. I don't know if both Tim and Tara, you want to say your last words as we cross?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the invitation to speak. Sorry that my time calculation was a little off, but I appreciate this opportunity and all the fantastic questions and such an interesting and diverse audience to get to interact with. So thanks, Diane and Meredith and the whole LCA team for all of your time in organizing this. It's such a great opportunity. And I would be happy to share my slides. I know a lot of people in the chat asked for that. So however, that's easiest to share. I'm very happy to share slides. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm just reading this really interesting comments still going on here. I wish this could keep going on, but a very well made point in the comments there. But yes, thanks everyone. Really enjoyed fielding some of the very insightful and relevant questions that were asked and comments that were made, meeting some sea cucumber experts from around the world that are on this call, and others involved in conservation here in Zanzibar, and a really wonderful group of conservation-focused individuals that you have brought together in this LCA talk. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present. And I'll definitely be tuning in to listen to some of your presentations in the future here. So thanks for the opportunity and nice to get to talk to you all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Timothy. We'll make sure that we will inform you our next talk that you should be with us. And without further ado, I want to say again, really thank you, and we appreciate both Timothy and Tara, and a round of applause to them for giving us an incredible presentation. I think everyone enjoyed this night. Yeah, so let's call it a night. Thank you, everyone.